Today, we're moving on to the second commandment, which it builds on the foundation that we set in the first commandment in a really crucial way. And so before we dive in, I just want to take a moment, if we can, just to recap where we've been and where we're going. So this series, Old Laws for a New Life, it's all about rediscovering the relevance and the power of the Ten Commandments for our lives today. And these aren't just ancient rules, but they're the foundation for our lives. And beyond that, they reveal God's character and in His design for our lives. And so last week, like I said at the beginning, we explored the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." And we talked about how this commandment calls us to give God our exclusive worship, to recognize Him as the one true God who deserves our ultimate allegiance. And we discussed how this plays out in our daily lives, challenging us to examine our hearts and to identify anything that might be competing with God for first place. So today, we're building on that first commandment as we look at the second commandment. And so let's read our text for today, which is Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 through 6. And let me find it. Okay, and they say this: "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." Now, at first glance, this commandment, it might seem pretty straightforward to us. Might even seem a little outdated. But after all, how many of us are tempted to carve statues and then bow down to it? I don't know that that's many of us, but I'm sure there's a few. But as we'll see, the heart of this commandment, it speaks really powerfully to our modern lives and the subtle idolatries that we face just each and every day. In fact, here's a key insight that I want us to grasp today, is that idolatry, even without carved statues, it remains a really powerful temptation in our times today. I know this was written a long time ago, but in our times today, it's still a really powerful temptation and impacting our spiritual lives in subtle ways. Or maybe to put it in a little bit more memorable of a way, is this: the heart of idolatry isn't in the hands that carve, but in the heart that craves. Let's break this down a little bit further. So the Hebrew word that's used here for carved image in our verse is pesel, and this refers to something that's shaped or fashioned by human hands. But the essence of this command, it goes far beyond just physical objects. See, God's teaching the Israelites and us that He is beyond human comprehension or representation. Just think about the context here. The Israelites, they've just been freed from slavery in Egypt, a land just filled with idols and images of gods. And now they're about to enter Canaan, which is another place where idol worship was just rampant. And what God's doing here is He's setting them apart, and He's calling them to a radically different way of relating to Him. See, in Egypt, the Israelites, they would have been just surrounded by images of gods like Ra, who was often depicted with a falcon's head, or Anubis, the god of the dead, who was often shown with a jackal's head. See, these were gods that they were believed to control just various aspects of life. And people would make offerings to them in seeking their favor by making those offerings. They would encounter gods in Canaan, the Israelites would, like Baal, who's often associated with fertility and storms, or Asherah, a mother goddess, or Molech, who's associated often with child sacrifices, as evil as that is, in order to appease him. So while the Bible doesn't give us explicitly what Molech was the god of, the historical and archaeological sources suggest that Molech may have also been linked to fertility, along with Baal, as well as life and death. So usually these, the children that were sacrificed to Molech were sacrificed by means of fire, as means of ensuring prosperity or protection. So they believed that by offering their children, these are the Canaanites, but they believed that by offering their children to Molech, they could gain favor or receive blessings or avert disasters. And it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that the worship of Molech was considered one of the most detestable practices in Canaan, and it was explicitly condemned in the Bible. We see this in Places like Leviticus 18:21, Leviticus 22 through 5, 2 Kings 23:10, Jeremiah 32:35. See, these deities in Canaan, they were often represented by carved wooden poles or stone pillars. And if you remember with me, think back to last week. If you haven't seen it, I'll put the video link in the description, as well as I'll put it in the video somewhere. But in the first commandment, we learned how God was calling Israel to radically different worship and worshiping just Him, the one true God. And by doing so, also denying the existence of any other gods just at all. And so here in the second commandment, we're building upon that because the God of Israel is different. Again, not only are we told not to carve images to worship, but even if we wanted to carve an image of God, we can't. See, he couldn't and he can't be represented fully by any image that we try and make, because there's not an image that exists on this planet that can fully capture His glory and His majesty. See, God's not limited to controlling the crops, the economy, or the sun. He's the creator and the sustainer of everything, of all things. See, there's a fascinating parallel in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 15 through 16, where Moses reminds the people that the day that God manifested Himself to His people in a blazing fire at Mount Horeb, or also known as Mount Sinai, they saw no form. See, the people, they could hear a voice, but they didn't see any physical form. We get that in verse 12. And so for this reason, Moses here, he warns Israel against making any idols at all to represent God. He said, "Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female." So why is this so significant? Well, because it underscores that God is transcendent, beyond our ability to fully grasp or depict. See, the Israelites, they heard God's voice. They saw the fire and the smoke on the mountain, but they didn't see a form that they could replicate. And this was intentional on God's part. And I love this because it reinforces to us that God He's too big to be reduced to an image or a statue or something small enough for us to control. And this ties directly into what we discussed last week about our entire lives being lived before God's face. So we don't get to shape God into what we want Him to be. We don't get to make Him more manageable. We don't get to make Him more comfortable. If that's possible. It's not. But instead, we're called to worship Him as He truly is. Isaiah understood this very well. In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 18, he asks, "To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness compare with Him?" And the implied answer is clear, is that it's nothing at all. Nothing in all of creation can adequately represent the Creator. And what we're seeing here is that the second commandment, right, the commandment not to make any graven images or idols, it reveals God's desire for pure worship, one that's untainted by our human attempts to just reduce Him into something finite. And so what it is it's a call to approach God on His terms, not our terms. As one commentator put it, he said this: "No image conceivable to them can serve to represent Him. They must worship Him as He is, not as they can envision Him or would like Him to be." Now, I want us to kind of just pause here for a second and just really let this sink in. Okay, how often do we, in our hearts and in our minds, try to make God more manageable? How often do we craft mental images of God that maybe they're more comfortable for us, right? That fit our preferences or that fit our desires. This commandment challenges us to constantly expand our view of God, to let Him be as big and as awe-inspiring and beyond our comprehension as He truly is. See, it's one of those things that makes our minds almost hurt when we try to picture it, almost because we can't comprehend it, right? The kind of awe that we get, the way that we get to that place mentally it's the kind of awe that we should have in worshiping our Creator and our Sustainer. Like, let me give you an example. Have you ever heard someone say something like, "Oh, well, my God, He wouldn't do that," or "the Jesus I worship does this," and fill in the blank. But or I like to think of God as, followed by whatever their personal preference is. I call these build a God statements because while it's natural to try and understand God, and it's good to want to understand and learn and draw closer to Him, we also need to be careful, though, that we're not reshaping Him to fit what we're comfortable with. See, the God that's revealed in Scripture, He's complex. He's both. I'll put it this way: He's both just and merciful. He's holy and loving. He's transcendent and immanent. See, this commandment is saying that we don't get to pick and choose which attributes that we like, and then just throw the others in the trash.